morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 137 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. We have our regular co-hosts, Ian Kummer from a suburb in Moscow, Carlo Parcelli in Satan's Anus, Washington, D.C., and Regis Tremblay, our special guest, is joining us from, do you live in Yalta, Crimea? I know you're in Crimea, and it's in Yalta.
Yalta, yeah.
Thank you so much. I know you are very busy. We're going to talk about that in a second, but let's. The title of our episode today is "Pissed at Putin," and that is a reference to the recent commentary from Donald Trump, complaining that Putin isn't jumping at this ceasefire agreement that the United States is trying to broker. So. What can be said about that? I have a lot of thoughts about that, and about the seriousness with which the United States is trying to get a ceasefire going. Would anybody like to give their opinion on that, or I can start?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was. You guys called my bluff. You called my bluff. So, I mean, it's schizophrenic. Trump is being schizophrenic. Nobody serious would expect Putin to just accept an across-the-board ceasefire, right? So now you have Kala Karlas, whatever her name is, complaining that Russia needs to extend an olive branch, and through an exercise of goodwill agreed to a ceasefire all along the line of contact. I mean, how ridiculous and preposterous is that? And they're condemning Putin, and Trump's mad now at Putin for not just agreeing to Minsk III. So it's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's ridiculous. And I think, obviously, nobody that knows what's going on expects Putin to just, accept this this proposal. But the Western audience, I think, is the target, right? Because now the whole point is to manufacture opinion, make it look like Putin is the one who's being a warmonger and not really interested in peace. And so Putin is to blame that this isn't going to work out. So that's kind of the way this is heading. And the last point I will make is how the Europeans are, the minute Trump said that, hey, I'm, allegedly, right? I don't think we have a quote of him saying that. We have a quote of him actually saying some things. But the pissed at Putin quote was, I think, something that somebody reported that he said. I don't think we have it on video. But the minute that was reported, you have all of the Europeans and all of the neocons so giddy, so excited. They've got their ear. Ooh, what does this mean? Is this a big sea change? I mean, and the thing is, with Trump, we don't know. We don't have any certainty that that they're not right, and that Trump isn't going to be ending his all of his peace initiatives and then turning on Putin and saying, hey, I tried my best and Putin's the problem. So let's hope that's not the case. But that's my 2 cents.
There's an enormous gap between reality and what goes on in Trump's head, and the guy is so transparent that a 4-year-old could see through him. And what intrigued me about that entire episode was, at the end, what he talked about was Zelensky's unwillingness to give up all of the mineral wealth as laid out by apparently a U.S. congressman in a casual conversation. All the mineral wealth in perpetuity to Donald Trump, not to the United States, not to it was basically to Donald Trump. That's where it was going to end up. So it's like, how transparent can you be? you can see right through this guy. There's nothing. He goes at things with nothing behind them. He just thinks he really believes he is the shit. He really believes that he can go in there and do what he said he could do, because that's what goes on in his delusional world. And I mean, it all comes down to, listen, Trump got a huge amount of money from the Adelsons, and the Adelsons made their money in gambling primarily, and yet Trump bankrupted several casinos. What better kind of tutelage could he have other than the Adelsons? Yet he couldn't run a casino on the basis of the way you really run a business. The guy's a mess. He's out there with nothing.
So
he's got nothing.
An alternative conception of the mineral wealth deal is that Trump intentionally is demanding that Zelensky agree to this deal, but at the same time he's putting in so many poison pills in the deal with the express purpose of making sure that Ukraine does not accept the deal, because then he can make Zelensky the bad guy. So we just don't know. But so we don't know which direction Trump is going. But I think it's plausible that this whole mineral deal is being offered with the intent that it is not accepted by the Ukrainians, that it would be impossible for them to accept. That way he can blame Zelensky and the Ukrainians and then push through this peace deal without them. But I don't know how he would do that. So anyway, that's just a different conception. But you could be very right. And it could be just Trump wanting to actually own the minerals himself, right? Sign it over to the Trump Corporation.
So I didn't expect when the negotiations in Saudi Arabia started, I didn't expect them to be fast, especially because it was clear from what everybody said. I mean, Rubio directly said it at one point that they're not just talking about Ukraine, right? It's the world in general. So I am very hopeful that all this is going to lead to an understanding, and that includes what's going on in Africa, in the Middle East, Iran, and all that. There's just some understanding, some spheres of influence, even that we're going back to this Monroe Doctrine style thing where there's an understanding, not even just Trump, there's an understanding in the USA in general that they can't hold on to the world, so they're constricting, right? That they're we're going to kick Chinese influence out of Latin America, we're going to kick Russian influence out. We're just going to have our piece of the pie that we can definitively control, because the alternative is what was happening under Biden, where they were just trying to control everything, but we're controlling nothing, right? Because you had you had the Belt and Roads Initiative expanding, you had Chinese deals, and even Russia was talking about all this stuff happening even in our own at least what the USA considers their backyard. So I could see the logic of saying, okay, we're just going to go back to controlling the Americas, right? I can see the logic in that. But it's time, and I also did not expect this to be fast. I'm not one of these people who's complaining that there's still no deal. I didn't expect it to be an overnight thing. But this pattern of Trump very loudly announcing stuff that neither side, not even just one side, neither side finds acceptable, being rejected by both sides, and this happening more than once, makes me think that he's a very bad understanding of what's happening, and that tells me it's not even, and it's not, and the problem is it's not just a Trump thing. This is, I think, even his information sources are bad. No one in the federal government really has a good understanding of what either side wants, or how you could even come up with something that both sides would agree to. So that's my 2 cents on it. Though I do think there is something to be said that there is a possibility that there's poison pills on the Ukrainian side. That's a deal they won't accept, and he has a justification to back out. But he's also not being friendly to Russia either. But he's like, I'm pissed off at Putin. Well, okay, you're pissed off at Zelensky, and you're also pissed off at Putin. And what and you're also pissed off with Europe. I mean, who are you not pissed off with at this point? So there you go. That's my 2 cents on that.
Regis.
Regis is muted.
He mute.
I'm unmuting him. Are you unmuted?
Sorry about that. I didn't want any background noise interfering. I couldn't believe it when he came out with it the other day that he was angry and pissed off at Putin. That's the way to make the way to make friends, isn't it? And to be a peacemaker when you tell your partner you're angry and you're pissed off at him in public. That was kind of stupid. But I think the thing about Trump, he's such a narcissist and has such an ego. He's doing everything he can multiple times a day to dominate the news cycle, not only in the United States, but around the world. And he's addressing his threats and his promises to everybody. I don't care. It's from China to the EU to Denmark to South America. He's threatening everybody with these outrageous comments and demands and threats. So I think the fact that he's getting so much coverage is just feeding this sickness, his narcissism. Now, in terms of the comments on the resource deal with Ukraine, what's really happening right now? It's the UK that is running the show in Ukraine. Zelensky went to London and he signed a 100-year deal with Keir Starmer, the UK, for this really tight relationship and their resources. So we've got a competition here between the United States and the UK, whose deal is really going to float. But the Russian position has always been the same. In terms of the resources, this deal, and in terms of the peace agreement, Zelensky is illegitimate. Russia has been holding on to that ever since his term expired. And so Trump is, on the one hand, saying, Zelensky's a dictator, but now on the other hand saying, well, wait a minute. What are you saying that he can't make peace? So Trump in his own head, I think, is really screwed up. In this particular case, we could go on about a lot of other things, but in this particular case, I think he's not helping himself. He's not helping anybody.
You mentioned he was angry at the EU. He's angry at Ukraine. He's angry at, Putin. In a sense, what he wants is a win. He's been talking about getting peace and making peace. And so he wants to be able to achieve what he said he was going to achieve. And the problem is the situation is too intractable, right? All of us were wondering, how on earth are you going to do it? You're going to have to throw somebody under the bus, and it's going to have to be Ukraine. You're going to have to throw Ukraine under the bus and dictate to Ukraine that they're going to have peace. That's the only way you can do it, and you got to surrender to Putin. And now you've got yourself in a position where your political opponents are going to accuse you of that. You're going to be surrendering. You're a surrender monkey. You're giving Putin everything he wants, and for that you're awful, right? So that's the challenge that Trump has, because it is an intractable thing unless you're just going to make Ukraine, just do exactly what Russia says. But there's one country that is not, that Putin, that Trump is never upset with, that Trump is never angry with one country, and he's got their back 1,000%, which is a problem. But that was just my thought as you were listing all the all the people that Trump's unhappy with. He's pretty happy with Netanyahu, loves Israel, and he's going to do whatever they want. But we don't have to go down that. That kind of opens us up into a whole different discussion. That
Yeah. One more comment, if I may,
please.
about Trump and Russia relations and, the peace deal. Trump campaigned on this point. He said, I will end that war on day one. Day one is 3 months past. And, he could have ended it on day one. All he had to do was stop all of the money, all of the weapons coming from the United States, all of the intelligence sharing, could have pulled out all the Americans who are in there, and they're in there, and he could have pressured the UK and all of the EU and NATO, because he runs the show over there, stop sending anything to Ukraine. Had he done that, this thing would have been over by now. So I really question his sincerity, and I really question whether or not this Atlantic alliance is really worth anything anymore, because it's obvious from what I read over here that the UK MI6 has been running the show in Ukraine for some time now.
After Zelensky was kicked out of the White House, he ran straight to Britain.
Right away, immediately. And he not only met with Starmer, but he met with the king.
And this in light of the New York Times article, you can take that for what it's worth, which lays out rather graphically how the United States was behind every decision that the Ukrainian military made, and that the Ukrainian government accepted. So, and the only reason they weren't successful, this is according to the New York Times, was because these brilliant plans were laid out by Milley and all these other people, yet in the military, all this high brass in the down at the Pentagon, but the Ukrainians kept going rogue, and they didn't execute the way they were told to execute. Otherwise, the Russians would have been defeated. It's just, so the delusion it's not limited to the White House. The delusion is around. It's all over the city here.
Thanks
it's
for
all
bringing
over the city. I'm sorry. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to thank you for bringing that article up. I know it's being discussed widely, in the alternative media sphere. So that was, I haven't read the article, but a lot of people are discussing it. It's really an effort. Is it the New York Times? Was that who published?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's an effort by the New York Times, the paper of record, to set the history, right? To set the authoritative history. So generations, the next generations can look back, read this article, and see what really happened. And so it's just so totally preposterous. Exactly what Carlo was saying. It's Russia being hapless, and we could have easily defeated them with U.S. help if only Ukraine would have followed our orders. And the brilliant United States could have easily, had this victory wound up, and Russia would have been defeated and surrendered. But because they're really nothing, and it's Ukraine that is the problem, because they did not follow our orders and lead. So this is what they're hoping future generations will learn about this conflict, and it's kind of how how things work. It's illustrative of how history is manufactured to benefit the interests that
Yeah.
Well, I did read that New York Times text. I'm not sure how it accepts it. When I accessed it, I was able to access it without paywall. I've heard complaints that they at some point put a paywall, though that's a very common tactic of dropping a bombshell or marketing something as a bombshell. Then putting it behind a paywall to drive up subscriptions. But yeah, and it's one of those things where it didn't really say anything that people paying attention to what's been happening were surprised by. Like if you read those alternative media spaces like Gray Zone or whoever, there's really nothing there that's like shocking, though it's interesting that they admit it. There is this pattern of something being said and then it's denied. No, that's fake news. That's Kremlin propaganda. And then 1 to 2 years later, it's admitted. There is that pattern. But there's not really any, I didn't really see any smoking gun revelations in it either. It wasn't really, I mean, it's known that the USA and London were involved with planning like these attacks on like the attack on the Kremlin Bridge with the high bars was planned. You know, those attacks on Sevastopol and the refineries. You know, a lot of that was directly coordinated, and that's been the Russian position all along. That all of those long-range strikes involve NATO intelligence and targeting data and geospatial imagery. So it's not new, but unfortunately, I didn't see any new information. And there wasn't anything we didn't already know either.
But you agree that it's kind of an effort to blame and vindicate, right? So the U.S. is vindicated, Ukraine is blamed, Russia comes out like not looking like they're strong, and we could have taken them if it wasn't. Is that kind of the impetus?
I didn't see any anti-Ukraine rhetoric. I mean, there definitely been articles in the past that were anti-Ukraine rhetoric. Like anytime you see, you know, I mean, maybe I should give it a reread because I wasn't thinking of it from that anti-Ukraine aspect. I didn't really look for that when I read it, but definitely any article like Financial Times or, you know, any Western, I think even the New York Times itself has posted, if I remember correctly, posted some articles like that. Anytime they say, oh, Ukraine is using Soviet tactics, that's like the cuss words they use. You know, if it's Soviet, that's why they're losing. They're too Soviets. If they just listened to us and used our special NATO tactics that we used so well in Iraq and Afghanistan that just worked wonders for us, they would have won already. But I don't know what the point of this article was, except to, I don't know. It's tough to say. It just kind of came out and it's stuff that we knew. It's just interesting to see them publicly admit it, and then
So yeah, and I wonder if there wasn't different articles. I wonder if I'm referencing the wrong article, because I know a lot. Like the Duran had a big episode about it, and but I don't remember it being New York Times, and so I wonder if there was another article that I'm getting confused with. But there was two things. You know, the U.S. is admitting to being more involved than they've been acknowledging. But like you said, everybody who's been paying attention already knew that. But the other aspect was just blaming. You know, saying it wasn't the U.S. It was Ukraine's fault because the U.S. should have had it.
Yet not about the 2014 Maidan coup, which was U.S. led. Not about the shelling of the Donbass by the Azov battalion for the years prior to that, which killed 14,000 people. That would have been key. That would have been an admission that would have turned heads around, because when I talk to the average people, it's not too often anymore, they don't know anything about it. I mean, Rosie and I were shocked. We met up with somebody we knew, and they were generally well informed. And when we, of course, the conversation gravitated around Ukraine. And when we brought up the Maidan coup, they'd never heard of it. All of their judgments, were based on aggression by Russia, blind aggression.
we all know that it was Putin. You know, he invaded and he was unprovoked. Everybody knows it was a totally unprovoked invasion. And how do we know that? Well, because that's what everybody's been telling us, you know, for the past 3 years.
Yeah, he stubbed his toe and somebody had to pay.
Yeah. I always like to look at things from the Russian perspective. Now, I mean, I've been living here for 5 years. I know Ian is up there in the Moscow metropolitan area. I'm really immersed with Russian people here in the Crimea. I only have contact with a couple of Americans, and I only see them on occasion. And basically, they're very pro-Russian. One of them's been here for almost 20 years, and another one he's a newcomer. So I don't pay attention anymore to any of the big-time bloggers from the United States. I don't pay attention to any of the media, the legacy media at all. Of course, I heard about the New York Times article, and of course, you know, in the Russian media, RT and Sputnik, you know, they will cover what Trump says. But my perspective always goes back to the consistency that Russia, in the persons of Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov, Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for the foreign ministry, Russia has been so consistent about this. And when the peace talks started, supposedly, one of the things that Russia said was that we have to go back to the root causes to solve the problem. Now, a lot of people stop at the 2014 coup that Carlo was referring to in Kiev, the Maidan. It was completely paid for and orchestrated by the United States. That's all over YouTube, in the mouths of Victoria Nuland, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and countless others. But Putin is talking about 1991. He's talking about the promise made to Gorbachev by then Secretary of State James Baker that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward towards Russia. The Warsaw Pact had dissolved. The Soviet Union had broken up. There was no need, from Russia's perspective, for NATO, for anybody's perspective, to need NATO. But that is at the root of all of Russia's problems in this particular era, in the current era. They go back much further than that, but this is what Putin is talking about. And so the way the Russians are looking at this is, wait a minute, we're the victim here. You know, we wanted peace. Putin tried to make peace with Clinton. He begged to be part of NATO and the European Union. He's wanted that most of his life. I think he's given up on it now. But if you can look at it from the Russian perspective and from history, from facts, it is clear that Russia is not the aggressor anywhere. And people will always bring up, oh, the Chechen War. Well, that was to put down radical Islamic insurrection in Chechnya. And now Chechnya and the president of Chechnya is fighting in Ukraine against the Ukrainians on the side of the Russians. They consider themselves allies or Russian people. And so I can't emphasize enough, if people could only see the truth. And Billy, you were mentioning it, and Carlo mentioning it, the facts. The New York Times, okay, fine, it mentioned some of the facts, but they left out a whole lot more. And I think it's really good that you're doing shows that are exposing all of this and are connecting the dots, because this is what people hopefully have got to come to understand. Unfortunately, I don't think they will. I think, you know, in terms of the United States population, the people of the United States, they've either been in denial about everything since the Vietnam War, or they are so totally out of it and addicted to something else, entertainment or whatever, that they can't even conceive. They can't even be willing to talk to you about the things that I'm mentioning. It doesn't register and a wall goes up. So from the Russian perspective, I will end with this. Putin's made it very clear. We don't need you. We've turned east. We've turned to the global south. We don't need you at all. And you can lay all these sanctions on us you want. You can put all these tariffs on us you want. It's not going to stop the growth of the BRICS, which Trump really has threatened to put out of existence. That's where Russia is headed, together with China, India, South America, African countries, and here the United States, because of all of this and because of the lies and the propaganda, has really isolated itself from the rest of the world. And that's really a sad reality, that the American people have no idea what's happening and they don't know what's coming.
I would like an uninterrupted half hour to respond, but instead of that, I'm gonna. Does anybody else have something to say? Because there was a lot there, Regis. That was a lot of great stuff that I want to add to, but I don't want to monopolize.
Well,
things.
go ahead, add to it. You can add to it. You can add to it. You okay. Go ahead.
So let's go back to 1991 when you had the dismantling of the Soviet Union. So there was two very different perceptions of what that was. So the West saw that as a surrender. They saw that as a victory, as now we can engage in conquest. But it wasn't sold to the Soviets. It wasn't sold to Russia like that. They didn't see it like that. They thought that they were really genuinely being offered a settlement for peace, and then a new era of peace through mutual cooperation and prosperity, mutual prosperity. So that's how they perceived things. And so but the reality was it was a lie. It was a ruse, all designed for conquest and conquering by the West. And so we saw that in the subsequent years, NATO, thought, okay, we have won. They're no longer strong. We no longer have to worry about them militarily. We can absorb all these countries into our military alliance. We can do what we want with impunity. They're weak. They can't resist us. The problem is they didn't understand that due to the sacrifice of World War II, where Russia sacrificed 30 million people, 28 million people. They were serious about not being defeated, about not allowing that sacrifice to be wasted and to go in vain, and to allow the West just to conquer and take over, surround Russia really, and then work towards more balkanization of Russia, regime change, and then balkanization. And I mean, the West accuses Russia of being an empire of nations, and all these little nations within Russia need to be their own country. And that's how the West wants to, see things go. That's the way they want to see things go. And Russia sacrificed, 30 million people not very long ago in order to keep that from happening. And there's no way in hell Putin, of all people, was going to allow the West to do that, to take over Ukraine and then leverage Ukraine against the Russian people. And so we saw what happened. And I think a lot of people were surprised that the special military operation took place. I think people in the West, it was like 50-50 that it was going to happen. And then they thought, oh, great, we're going to defeat Russia because they've just got themselves into this quagmire, and we're going to, defeat them economically and militarily. And it's just not working out for them. So all that came to mind, as well as Putin, Russia saying, yeah, we don't need the West. We're going to look east. We're going to look to the global south. And Xi will be meeting. He'll be the guest of honor. And is it the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War coming up shortly? Regis, do you know?
Yeah, May 9th. May 9th, Victory Day.
So there is a very tight alliance, and what Western strategists have always tried to warn against and keep from happening, is exactly what they've done, which is push Russia and China super tight and close together, and it's to the detriment of the West. Like it's great for Russia and China, and it's what needs to happen, because the West is the problem, and so I'm very happy to see this real tight alliance between Russia and China, and it's necessary. And then of course Iran plays a part of that, and that's a whole nother front and a whole nother discussion. But the West it's losing. Its strategy has failed, and so again, what we're seeing is the decline of Western imperialism. We're seeing it play out in real time, and the question is, everything is up to the West. How is the West going to react to their inevitable, defeat, their inevitable weakening? And that's what's worrying, because they could cause a lot of mayhem, a lot of chaos, a lot of death and destruction as they are declining, or they could be sensible and just be a normal country and just start cooperating instead of trying to confront and dominate and maintain their fading and collapsing hegemony. That's about it. Okay.
I was at this conference, 2-day conference last week, and several Russians, they were lawyers, they were academics, political scientists, academic, people from the university. And several of the people spoke about how close we are to a nuclear war. Now, you had mentioned, Iran is a whole other matter. It's not, because Russia is involved in that area, supporting Iran. Okay, China has been supporting Iran. And several of these experts pointed out not only Trump's rhetoric, but his actions to date, and with the sanctions and the tariffs, it's economic World War III, what it is, this economic warfare that he's doing. And they said, we are closer now than maybe we've ever been to a nuclear war. Trump could trigger it. The United States could trigger it anywhere. They could trigger it certainly in Ukraine, because they're obviously losing. They think they're winning in the Middle East, but they're not, and they won't. And when you connect China and Taiwan to this, it's obvious to the Russians that were at this conference, they are looking at a declining empire that is very dangerous. I'll leave it at that.
You brought up the secondary sanctions, kind of. You talked about the economic warfare, and that was, we didn't address that yet. So, Trump, he's kind of, for the first time, he kind of was expressing anger towards Russia, towards Putin. And again, that when he did that, man, the whole Western world was so giddy. Like, tell me more, Trump. Yeah, go with that, because we're going to back you 100%. But part of his threat was that he's upset at Putin, and if Putin doesn't agree to the ceasefire, we're going to do secondary sanctions, which just means that anybody that does business with Russia will also be sanctioned. So we're not just sanctioning Russia, but we're going to sanction anybody that does business with Russia. And they've threatened the same thing against Iran, I believe. They already have secondary sanctions against Cuba. I mean, it's what they've been doing against Cuba for a long time. But yeah, it's very hubristic, and it's very dangerous to the entire global economy to start, just breaking up and tearing apart the system of global commerce that we've had. And so there's no way that it's going to be good for humanity if the United States does that. It's going to be terrible for humanity. But what it is going to be good for is it's going to give this tiny minority of Western oligarch psychopath warmongers a hope. It's a strategy. It's a strategy that, this is going to we're going to use our economic might, which is still considerable. And with this economic might, we're going to bring everybody else to their knees. I mean, but the thing is, it's like chemotherapy, right? And this is how they kind of envision it. It's chemotherapy. They're going to make the whole planet sick, and they're going to hope that they can target it against their rivals, and everybody's going to be hurt, but their rivals are going to be hurt the most. And then, and then they can stop doing it and they'll go back to business as usual with them in charge. Is the hope? Like no rational person ought to think that that's a good plan. It is sure to do one thing: cause a lot of misery and mayhem and poverty, throughout the world, and it'll be terrible. If there's a war with Iran, if there's a big economic embargo of China, of Russia, like these aren't going to be good things for the United States, for people here. It's like, think about the supply chain during COVID. If you thought it was bad then, I mean, wait and see what happens. But is this inevitable? I think it's likely. Obviously, it's not inevitable. But, I mean, can you imagine the U.S. just changing course and saying, okay, you know what? We're going to start cooperating because this is nuts. This is bullshit. We don't have a winning strategy. But the thing is, what they're doing every hour is preparing. They are preparing and getting things in place to do this. And so it's just inconceivable to me that they're not going to end up at some point pulling the trigger and initiating this big, huge grand reset, you could call it, which will fix all their problems, right? It's going to subdue all their enemies. It's going to this debt that's weighing down on them, 33 trillion. All these problems, just a big war, a big war. And so I don't know. I just feel that it's very likely that that's going to happen, and it's going to be really bad for humanity. And it's not going to win them anything. It's not going to be a winning strategy. Okay, Ian, tell me, talk some sense into me. Am I out there? Like, is this crazy talk? Am I living in an alternate universe?
I don't know. I don't know what was going on prior to Trump taking office, because I had the same question. What are they thinking? What are they going to do? How are they going to fix this? Because, the U.S. economy has been in meltdown for a while. The debt's going up $1 trillion every 100 days. And it's just like, what was the plan? How are you going to get out of this? Is there even... I'm thinking more and more, there just wasn't a plan. Nobody, it certainly wasn't Biden who was thinking it. It wasn't, I looked around that group of people. I did not see any smart people. It's not that there's an I just don't see anyone smart enough to even know or to think that far ahead or even acknowledge there's a problem. Talk to any Democrat on the street and ask them, what was, let's say we have Kamala Harris as president. What were they going to do? What were they going to do with Russia? What were they going to do with China? What were they going to do with the national debt? You just be like, Trump is bad. They have no plan. So now we have Trump. I'm not sure they're smart. I don't know about that. But I do think there is a plan. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good plan, but I think the idea is, and I think that's, the idea is that they're going to string this thing in Ukraine along long enough so Europe goes all in, right? They start seizing Russian assets, which they haven't done. They did that kind of middle ground of giving interest payments to Ukraine, but they haven't actually said, the Russian assets are ours. And the important thing to realize is the majority of those Russian assets are in European banks, right? Only a small percentage is in U.S.-controlled banks. So the majority of it is Europe. So I think, and I saw this, I think I said this in the last show, I saw a Zero Hedge article saying that I think there's, it's only guessing, but I think there's a lot of basis to think that is what they're trying to do. They're hoping that Europe will go all in. The USA negotiates a deal, says, I'm out. Europe goes all in. They crash their economy. And what happens if Europe causes a bank run, right? Investors are like, oh crap, Arabs say, oh crap, if Russians are first, we're next. All these different people with money in European banks say, oh crap, I need to get my money out before they take mine, because let's be honest, the majority of Europe's clients are dictators. I mean, they just are, right? Saudi Arabia, all these people who have money in Europe, they're just going to be like, okay, I'm going to get my money out while I can. Where are they going to take it? They'll take it to the USA. So I think the idea is they're going to there's going to be capital flight from Europe to the USA. Same with their industry. Industry flees Europe, goes to the USA. There's there's enough to mitigate a recession, right? I think that's what they're hoping happens. I don't know if they're competent enough to do that, but I think there's a lot of basis for saying that's the plan.
You're muted, Regis.
They don't seem to acknowledge in Washington specifically, or most importantly, the complexity between trade and war, and these complexities go much farther than that. They go to heritage. They go to the arbitrary way that many national borders were drawn up, and the history of that. But just hang on to the notion, the difference between trade and war. I mean, I've seen the figures; they flash by you. You'll see that 30% of U.S. corporations have interests in China. Maybe it's more. I can't remember the exact figures, but these are U.S. corporations, and U.S., whether you like it or not, has become a corporate state. So they really would have the last say whether or not they would want to have their holdings in these companies liquidated, destroyed. I look at videos, and I see these gorgeous new cities that are cropping up all over the world. Many of them tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. Why would China want to go to war with anybody when they're passing all of this largesse out and receiving all of this money back in, all of this wealth? The world has become world trade has become too much entangled, I think, to bear the kind of you against them attitude that's been embraced, for example, in Ukraine. And I really don't see everyone with a stake in the game. And believe me, I'm not one with much of a stake. Going and sacrificing it all for what's not even backed up by an ideology anymore. What's the ideology behind Russia? There is no ideology. What's the ideology behind Europe? There is no ideology. This notion of democracy, well, that's been debunked. So, not to mention the U.S., where you can just haul somebody off the streets and send them to prison. Come on, that's dead. That's gone. That's just fascist. So I think that you really have to really consider what trade means, and where the wealth is gained and lost as a major criteria in what's going to happen in the future. I mean, I watch a bunch of these shows, and because I've sort of been reduced to that by my present condition, but everybody's Nostradamus. Everybody's looking down the road into the future, and they're predicting the future. And then when they're wrong, the people that watch them call them out on it. But I would, you're going to be wrong more than you're going to be right. That's for sure. I mean, I think Alexander McCorus was right that Brian Berlatic got many things right, as as he was reflecting on the New York Times article. But by the same token, it's no one's 100% correct, and I don't know. It kind of gives me this hope that these people love their billions of dollars so much they're not going to put them at risk. You see shots of Ukraine, and I mean it's devastated. Not to mention Gaza. It's awful. But what did they both have in common? They were there for the picking. And now it's seen that there's more wealth to be gained ultimately by destroying and rebuilding Ukraine the way it was planned to destroy and rebuild Iraq, for example. So I don't know. It kind of gives me a not optimism, because I don't really have much reason for that, given the condition the world is in. But certainly, it has to be considered. The money, follow the money, follow the money.
I mean, they're putting new long-range missiles in the Philippines, which isn't a move towards peace and commerce. It's a move to interdict commerce. And then we see in the European Union, we're seeing all these attacks on democracy, and they're getting rid of these politicians that might not be on board with a big war against Russia, right? So Le Pen was just taken. She can't run in the 2027 election now. The guy they're always attacking poor Orban in Hungary. They want to kick him out of the EU. There's the Romanian person that was pro-Russia. They just said, no, you won the election, but I'm sorry, we're going to annul the election.
Yeah,
you're the wrong kind of government that we want our democracy.
Yeah.
So
Duterte too. To go back to the Philippines, Duterte's been arrested, or not arrested, but brought before the ICC.
Sent over to the ICC. His daughter has been marginalized out of the government. And Marcos, he's got $30 billion that the U.S. controls, and so they have total leverage over him. He has to do whatever they say, or he'll never see those $30 billion, that he's got stashed over here. So they've got proxies that they can, weaponize against their adversaries and rivals like China and Russia. Regis, you've got some things I'm sure to say.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to something we touched on just a few minutes ago. Europe is all in for war against Russia. The Italians are not in favor. The Spanish are not in favor. But the UK, France, Germany, the Baltics, and a handful of others are telling their people, prepare for war. Make sure you have enough food and supplies to last, are you ready for this? 4 days. You got to be busting your gut. A war is going to take place between the EU and Russia, and their people have got to have enough food to survive for 4 days. It's not going to last a day. Here's the thing about it, though, which is really scary. All of their economies are in the dumps. All of them are hurting. Okay? They can't posture about that. What happens when countries are desperate because of failing economies? You often get war. World War I, World War II. And this is what's happening right now with the champion of all champions, the UK, the colonialists without any peers are behind this. And it's their City of London, Rothschild banker cabal that are above all of this. They've been wanting total control of the whole planet for a long time. Russia has been their target for several hundred years. And so when I hear this, the drum beats for war, and I hear Trump making these kinds of threats, we're going to bomb the hell out of Yemen. Iran, we're going to bomb you like you've never seen anything before. This kind of rhetoric is really frightening. And this is why I mentioned that a couple of people at the conference I attended said we're closer to nuclear war because of this power struggle about who's going to control the future when these empires are in such decay and decline. This is the question, I think, facing humanity today. What will they do when they realize they've lost this battle for the future control and order of the world? Will they blow it all up?
Ian, I had some thoughts about your what you were saying about the plan, the United States plan. So Regis was talking about the UK's plan. The United States has its own plans, and you suggested that we're trying to solidify, make America great again, right? So Trump wants all the capital from the EU to go to the United States. And also, if currently the United States is a net energy exporter. So if you can combine our natural gas, our shale oil, and our regular oil, we're a net exporter of energy. But we're trying to get a hold of energy resources in Mexico, in Canada, and in Greenland, right? So I think that we're preparing for a future escalation, kind of like Regis is saying, a future escalation in security competition, and we're trying to create Fortress America in order to deal with the chaos that we're going to unleash as we let go of our efforts to maintain a rules-based order. So there's been this rules-based order since World War II. That is no longer tenable. That's falling apart. And so we're gonna recalibrate and refocus on Fortress America. Get all these, get all the capital flight from Europe. Access to these energy resources in Canada, Mexico, Greenland. And then we'll be able to really have a security competition and really go to work undermining China and Russia and doing our best to destroy their economy, destabilize their societies, and maintain our hegemony. That seems like a very likely prospect. And the alternative to that would be, no, we're just going to start cooperating and playing nice, and we're going to do peace through mutual prosperity, win-win trade and development. Which option is better for humanity? Which option will the West decide to pursue?
Well, here's the thing about wars. Very often, conflicts just cease to serve a purpose. I think a really good example of that is Afghanistan. I mean, some people speculated what are the material reasons the U.S. wants
Opium.
Well, there's that, which I'll get into, but also there was that nuclear deal with Iran. So having the next country over to lean on them was less important, at least at that time. Then Trump, of course, negotiated a peace deal withdrawal from Afghanistan while also reneging the nuclear deal. People are still scratching their heads about that one. But like you said, the big one is opioids. And it's known that under the Taliban, before the invasion, they outlawed opium and got it down pretty close. I don't think they got it quite down to zero, but they got down pretty close to zero. They outlawed it. And then invaded, it came back, and not only came back, it went up exponentially, and then the Taliban came back and outlawed it again. Well, what happened in that 20 years? You had synthetic opioids, right? So the people in Europe, in Russia, in China, in the USA, in every place where somebody was profiting from the import of opium from Afghanistan, it became less lucrative just because there's so many synthetic opioids on the market now. If you're a junkie or you're a rich person who likes to shoot up heroin in whichever country, it's less important now because there's analogs to it.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the Taliban was just continually causing problems. If anyone had hopes of exploiting lithium or whatever else they found in Afghanistan, it was never going to be stable enough for that to happen. And, whatever benefit there was from the heroin industry it was outweighed by the Taliban continually increasing their hostile actions towards ISAF, towards the government. But now we think about Ukraine and maybe Eastern Europe in general, that eastern flank of NATO and the western flank for Russia. Think of what was happening before that all started. I mean, we had COVID, right? That was the big, because you mentioned earlier in the show, the Great Reset, which, by the way, is fake news. I don't want YouTube or Zuckerberg, whoever's listening in, it's fake news. The Great Reset is not real. There is no such thing as a Great Reset. It's fake news. But that was getting milked pretty much to the limit, right? It was, at the end of 2020, when everybody was tired of the lockdowns, people were pushing back against the mandatory all this stuff, right? And then there's Ukraine, Slava Ukraini, you have to stop Russia. That was a transition, right? It was very funny. Like, that's why there's that joke. I'm sure Regis has heard of it, that Putin cured COVID because Russia basically ended most of their anti-COVID regime and got rid of what was left after the special operation started. And then everybody else in unison also said it. It's very funny. Like, suddenly COVID was overnight was cured. USA dropped their masking mandates, all this other stuff. Everybody at the same time. But think of an alternate reality. Try to imagine that where there wasn't any war in Ukraine. Just nothing happens. For whatever reason, nothing happens in Ukraine. There was just a status quo. What were they going to do? I mean, they couldn't. What was Biden? What were all these guys in the EU going to do to keep their population scared and in line? Because people were at that point. Maybe they could have milked it for another year, but maybe not. I mean, it was just, especially since the rest of the world had largely moved on by that point. It started looking ridiculous that only Western country is. China was still locked down, but for the most part, everybody else had moved on. They were not going to milk that for much longer. What would they have done if they didn't have the Russian bogeyman? But now we're a bit different because there's a different regime in power, right? There's Trump, there's Make America Great Again, there's America First. It's a different set of people in power. They don't necessarily care about that state of emergency that the previous regime did. So there might not, but we also don't know. We don't know for sure how bad the American economy is doing. We don't know how bad things are in Europe. And we can look at the energy prices. We can look at credit card debt. We can look at all these factors that are through the roof. But it's hard to say if they're going to just say, we're not going to have a war with anybody. And just like you said, just have trade, mutual prosperity. I think it's more likely that there's going to be a conflict somewhere because there's just been continuous conflict for so long. It's hard to believe they won't continue that, but I do find it amazing. I do think that was untenable what Biden was doing. That we're going to go after Russia and China at the same time. That's the losing side of the Sino-Soviet split, right? It's just it's like Sino-Soviet split, but in reverse. I think they're going to try to get one of them on our side. And I think right now it's likely that's going to be. And when I say our side, I don't mean buddies, best friends with matching tattoos, but I think come to an understanding with one of them and go after the other. And I think it's not decided which one that is. I think so it's this kind of schizophrenic. Putin pissed me off. We're going to go after China. Zelensky pissed me off. This schizophrenic is just kind of trying to bully everybody and then eventually reaching understanding with somebody. So that's what they're probably trying to do. Go ahead, Carla. What were you going to say?
To be anecdotal, for a moment, Brian Berletic, who lives in Thailand, he was upset and concerned at the last government that was elected in Thailand, because it had leanings toward the West. Yet, yesterday or the day before yesterday, Thailand, I hear, joined BRICS. Now it's a BRICS country. Now it's looking toward that kind of largesse, and it's become one of the most desirable countries to live in. Many expatriates from the U.S. and around the world are moving to Thailand. So that's what I see going on. And sure, I mean, China has named it multipolarity. They've got it down, and they're building all kinds of infrastructure all over Africa. Niger, by simply getting the fair price for its uranium, has gone from a debtor nation to a nation with a surplus wealth overnight, virtually overnight. So there's a kind of a different mojo going on a little bit, and this is maybe what's isolating the Europe and the United States so much, because they're accustomed to the old imperialistic method where you just take what you want and stomp over the people you're taking it from. I mean, a good example of that is when we have Chris Black on. He immediately begins to talk about Africa and the parts of Africa, Congo region, that he's familiar with, and that seems hopeless. And he's got me to the point wherever I see an image of Kagame, I just wince, But there is something new on the horizon, and it's very materialistic, so that it's not so beholden to ideological or religious boundaries, and it's backed up now by the world's largest economy, which is China. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know why I'm feeling optimistic this morning, but I am. So.
Well, that is unusual. We will take it. Ian, you mentioned, that the U.S. is just kind of sputtering around incoherently, but eventually they're going to lock on a target and try and, ally with either Russia or China against the other. But I mean, is that really up to the United States? It seems to me that there's other parties that have a veto over that. And it seems like Russia and China are close enough where there's nothing. I mean, with the current leadership, let's just say a caveat with the current leadership, there's nothing that the United States could do to, pull one away and get it on its side against the other. Like that, like these leaders are way too wise and understanding to ever in a billion years allow anything like that to happen, that kind of a catastrophe to happen again. They're not idiots. You would have to be a real idiot to go along with that and to throw your lot in with the United States.
Well, when you have a hammer, everything is a nail. So when I say sputtering around, I think what's happening is this is the American idea of negotiation, of just pushing everybody and then seeing how they respond to it. I think that's the attempt at negotiation. Of this, it looks schizophrenic, it looks meaningless, and maybe to an extent it is. But I think the idea is they're feeling out how everybody responds, and then we'll settle on partners and settle on foes. I wouldn't call China and Russia close allies. I know that maybe in a best case, in an ideal world, they would be, but they are. And like with what Tom Robbins just commented, asking, will China and Russia let Iran go down? Well, I mean, I don't see any reason China would care about Iran. Iran was a very good partner to Russia, especially in the last few years, when the sanctions first started and parallel imports, because those took a while to kick in, right? It wasn't immediate. It took months, in some cases years, for all of the parallel import schemes to kick in Russia. And Iran did send a lot of stuff to Russia. And of course, they shared military technology, right? So the demand for drones, and of course, there's never been a war like this that leaned this heavily into drones, and Iran has a very good drone program. So they did this program of giving, or I should say sending, or selling, whatever the deal is, sending those Shahid drones to Russia, and also apparently negotiating a contract for them to be made domestically. And so, yeah, Iran was a very good partner. And of course, I'm sure Iran is being discussed very intensely when Russians and Americans talk, because Trump is very anti-Iran, because of course he's very pro-Israel, and Iran is public enemy number one for the greatest country on earth, for Israel, the master race. But so far, Russia's been very much, at least diplomatically, in Iran's corner. They support Iran having their civilian nuclear enrichment program. They've not, so I think that's not going to change. Especially the problem and the issue with the USA, of course, is that so unreliable that 4 years later you can have a completely different person as president, and he just decides, I'm going to reverse everything the last guy did. So especially when it comes to burning bridges, because the USA is to some extent asking for bridges and for relationships to be undone. And the problem is, if you undo a relationship with someone else and then the USA itself backs out of whatever they'd agreed to give you, that's, of course, the problem. And I think that's actually a problem for Trump. And it's going to make him hard to it's going to be hard for him to convince anyone that the USA can be trusted with any long-term deal. So I think I have about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to see what we wanted to hit next.
I mean, Regis, I don't know if you needed to head out. I wanted to argue with Ian a little bit, and so does David K. But I don't want to hold you captive, Regis, if you have to get going.
I do, and yeah, I have another commitment here coming up pretty much in a couple of minutes. So thanks for having me. It's been a fascinating discussion. I like the flow of the show.
It's about to get heated, Regis. So you're gonna miss the heat. But
send me the link. Send me the link. All right.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'll pop you out.
Okay, great.
Take care, Regis.
See you soon.
Good to see you.
Well, I was just joking, of course. I love to disagree. We always disagree. So David was saying, wait, that's not the one. Let's see. I think Ian is underestimating the importance of Iran to China. And I was thinking the same thing. I mean, China and Russia both have the same take with regards to the Iranian nuclear program. They both support it. They both think that it needs to be resolved by peaceful means, and that they understand that Iran has a right to nuclear energy and their nuclear energy program. And so any questions that the West brings up, which they bring up, illegitimately, these questions are not legitimate questions. They're brought up in order to, weaken Iran and destroy their nuclear program. But both Russia and China agree that those questions need to be resolved peacefully. And then China is a big importer of Iranian energy. So I don't see that Russia is a greater ally to Iran than China is. I don't think either Russia or China will not be getting involved militarily in the event that the West does attack, that Trump does attack, because Trump has threatened that if they don't agree to this nuclear some kind of a deal regarding their nuclear program, that Trump has said he's going to attack them. And I don't see Russia or China needing to intervene militarily, because I think Iran is very strong.
Here's the thing. So yes, Iran is a marketplace for China. They buy Iranian petroleum. They no doubt sell things to Iran, but they haven't, like MK said, they haven't done anything. So you can substantiate that there's a very good partnership between Russia and Iran, and you can see that even just being in Russia, or just seeing what they say about Iran and what they kind of stake their credibility on Iran's behalf. I don't know. Like I said, I don't see any reason. That's what is my exact comments that David K did. It's like, I said, I don't see any reason for China to care. So maybe there's some big China-Iran partnership I don't know about, but I would ask somebody on the show to tell me what that partnership is. How is it substantiated?
Yeah, just recently, so China submitted a 5-point plan to the Iranian nuclear issue commitment. So here's the 5 points. This was in March. So commitment to peaceful settlement. China emphasizes staying committed to peaceful settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue through diplomatic means. China opposes the use of force or threats of force. So they're supporting Iran, saying that the West should not be threatening them. Nuclear non-proliferation with rights respected. China calls for fulfilling nuclear non-proliferation goals while respecting Iran's legitimate right to peacefully use nuclear energy. They're committed to the JCPO framework. They're opposed to unilateral sanctions, and they're for regional security cooperation. China promotes establishing a new framework for security and cooperation in the Middle East, addressing both the symptoms and root causes of tensions. But so to me, I see all that as supporting Iran, and it's really not that different. It's the same level of support and rhetoric that Russia gives Iran. I don't see a difference there, but we can agree to disagree. I don't think that either. Again, if there is an attack against Iran, I think Iran is strong. Iran has a very capable missile program. They're a very vast country. Their whole military doctrine is intended to survive an attack, right? Survive the kinds of attacks that the United States is threatening to launch. And this has been their their military doctrine for like 3 decades now, and they're stronger than they've ever been. I don't think there's a military option against Iran. Trump ought to know that, but maybe he doesn't, and so he might try it. But Iran isn't a weakling. They don't need Russia to defend them or China to defend them. And I don't think that either country would really overtly intervene militarily. Of course, they're going to provide help, support in various covert ways. But I think they would both do that. Anyway, what do you think, Ian? Do you think there's a likelihood that the United States is going to attack Iran? And if they do attack Iran's nuclear program, are they going to use nuclear weapons that they've been they've been moved to Diego Garcia with the B-2s, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you just said a lot, so I need to kind of address those one point at a time. It's true. China did. That's a bullet point list. They did the same thing for Ukraine. Actually, Turkey has done the same thing for Ukraine, but I don't think we can say Turkey is an ally of Russia. We can't actually say Turkey is an ally of Ukraine either. It's advantageous for third-party countries to say, look, I have a bullet point list of peaceful things. They're not. Because right now in Saudi Arabia, it's known that Russia's negotiating concerning Iran, among other things, not just Iran, but among other things. They're and to some extent, at least to some extent, arguing on the behalf of Iran. Right now, China, I mean, again, I just don't know what China does or what stake China has in it, but as of right now, they're not doing that. And I would say, as far as the Chinese role, it's telling that it's happening in Saudi Arabia and not Beijing, because that is something China could have said. We would love to be that host of negotiations between Russia and the USA. We don't know. Maybe the offer is never made. Maybe the USA and Russia would not want to have negotiations in China. But at the end of the day, it was Saudi Arabia. That's because it also needs to be said that Saudi Arabia, as of right now, has partnerships with both the USA and with Russia. So they're kind of hedging their bets a bit. But in the end of the day, it was Saudi Arabia that it looks like Carlo really wants to say something. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Carlo.
Maybe it's the way that Europe and the U.S. have for creating a reason to attack China, because all we hear now is Russia is a lost cause. Well, not from some quarters, but generally the Ukraine-Russian war is over. So they want to seek out a new enemy. Well, the way you do it possibly is to attack Iran, and you got to demonize China. So if China reacts in a way outside the framework that Billy Bob just quoted, or even inside it, actually, they can be demonized as we know that's perfectly within the capability of the United States of Edward Bernays to do, and that would get people inflamed the way they are here about Ukraine, knowledgeless, dumb, stupid people, but you'd have them behind you, and that would be your excuse for attacking China. And I was just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit here, but China seems to be on the U.S. radar as somebody they want to take out or have a conflict with, and but right now you couldn't go down a street in the U.S. and have anybody that sees China as an enemy, really, not. So anyway, I'll throw that out.
Congress is about the only place you could see that. But there's definitely a push to demonize China, and there's definitely the whole pivot to Asia. I mean, it's definitely a target. But yeah, they're going to need a justification. And so whether that justification is, if Taiwan declares independence, and then China blockades Taiwan, and then the United States would say, well, now we're going to have to blockade China, or whether it's going to be a war against the Philippines because the Philippines does something very provocative in the South China Sea. That could be an impetus for really ratcheting up, aggression, economic aggression, probably to start with against China. But Ian, so I was wondering about, the likelihood. What do you think is the likelihood that the United States will attack Iran, or that they can come to an agreement? Because if the United States comes to an agreement with Iran, that would mean two things. That would mean that Iran, who is in a strong position, I feel Iran is in a strong position because there's not a viable military option against Iran. So Iran knows this. They're in a strong position. They're not going to surrender their rights, or they don't have to. So there's no agreement that they could come to with Trump that wouldn't be good for them. They're not going to be forced into making a bad agreement. And here's the problem. If Iran makes a good agreement with Trump that's good for Iran, Netanyahu is going to be pissed. The whole point of hiring Trump and getting him in office is to make Israel great again, to make Israel the greater hegemon of West Asia, the Middle East, etc. That's that's kind of why why Miriam Adelson invested hundreds of millions of dollars in him, is because he's going to protect and defend Israel. And if he makes a deal with Iran that isn't detrimental to Iran, he's really going to be stabbing Miriam Adelson in the back. He's going to be stabbing Netanyahu in the back. And is he going to do that? It's a very tough position. So to me, I think chances are he's going to start bombing Iran. That's just gonna open a Pandora's box, and we'll be off to the races. And we will only remember what the rules-based order was like, because we'll never be there again. What do you think?
I think it's very unlikely that the USA is going to directly attack Iran. I think it's also unlikely that Israel will, because look at Israel right now. They have their hands full with the Palestinian final solution. And if the war in Ukraine reaches a conclusion within the next 12 months, which it probably will, that's going to free up a lot of Russian resources, because right now most of what Russia produces goes straight to Donbass, goes straight to Kursk, goes straight to that military zone. They've really, they even went back and renegotiated their exports to India because they realized those tanks they were making for India, they needed for themselves, right? So most of their military industry is tied up with that. But when that ends, that will all that stuff they're making that's hitting Ukraine right now can be used to can be sent somewhere else, and that includes Iran, right? And the big thing that Iran would need would be I don't know what exactly Iran would need. I can't speak for them, but they would need S-400s, S-500s. Air defense would probably be the biggest one, and they might want Russian missiles, right? Offensive capability. Those are probably the big things that they would want from Russia. And if there's no reason for Russia could not give them those things once Ukraine is resolved. So if we come to a point where still nothing's happened in Iran and Ukraine is over one way or another, I think the odds of the USA doing anything after that point are pretty much zero, because even now, if they did something right now, it'd be we saw that last year with that pissing contest Israel and Iran got into, where I bomb you and you bomb me, and it went back and forth a couple of times and just kind of ended. And Iran really didn't try to hurt Israel. They didn't go after desalination plants. They didn't go after energy infrastructure. They weren't trying to ruin their day. If it really came down to a serious war, of course they could do something a lot more drastic. And so I think it's very unlikely that it's going to escalate to that. I think it's extremely unlikely.
It sounds like you're saying that the status quo is going to kind of be maintained in perpetuity, and the U.S. is not stupid enough to do a drastic change in the status quo that's going to, put everything at risk. So they'd rather maintain this unfortunate status quo from everybody's perspective, rather than to risk getting in a much worse situation.
I think the military force towards the status quo was in Ukraine. And if there was going to be more military force, we would have seen it already. I think the next big move in that game is going to be economic and political. So it's because a big war would be it's. I also think it's very unlikely that the USA could win that. That's the main reason they're not going to try it. Because it's just Iran is not Saddam Hussein's Iraq. It's a much stronger country. It's a much better armed country. And the USA is in a much weaker position than it was in 2003, both in terms of economy and debt, in military stockpile, because especially with Ukraine, and also just in how enthusiastic the population is for a costly war that American troops would actually go to and to be dying in. So it's just, I don't see that happening. I don't think we're going to see another major ground war with American.
So how does he, his rhetoric, right? Because he's given deadlines, Ian. He said by May 1st, you will capitulate or we will bomb. Like, how does he get out of this? How does Trump get out of that? I mean,
he just doesn't. He won't do it.
He just doesn't do it. He just doesn't do it.
Hey, no, I hope that's correct. I mean, it would great, because everybody will just laugh at Trump and he'll expose himself, to all of his MAGA supporters as a blowhard.
You'll do better exposing Trump talking about Elon Musk than you will talking about Iran. Believe me. This has got to be the only show where no one's mentioned Elon Musk.
Oh,
yeah.
We did not talk domestic policy, so he's more involved in the domestic policy and the changing of, I guess you could say, downsizing of the American government. But it's a can of worms that maybe we ought to save for another program. Ian, did I let you say your piece? Is there anything you wanted to say? I mean, we had a little disagreement, but it wasn't.
No, I think it's a good conclusion to it.
So we have the great journalist Max Perry scheduled for Friday. So I can say with certainty we plan on having a show on Friday. So we hope to see everybody then. I appreciate David K, Tom Robbins, and MK, getting involved in the discussion in the chat. And thank you, Carlo and Ian. And I already thanked Regis, but I appreciate everybody's participation. And we will definitely reconvene on Friday. So we'll see everybody then. Thank you very much.
All right.